So how did I come to own a Rampart? Well, I used to be in advertising in London in an agency called Collett Dickinson Pierce, and when I got fed up with that, I formed my own business, which I then walked out of because I got fed up with that. And then in 1993 my wife died all of a sudden, and so whenever this happens to people, you have to sit down and think, what shall I do? And having sold a house, I then, after 5 years, had had enough of 2 teenage children, bless them, and so I said, well, I'm going to buy a boat and I'm going to France to be a rich and famous writer, which never happened because I became a grandfather instead. As my son came down to Southampton, and that was it really. I mean, I don't miss London, I don't miss advertising. I'm sure it's not as much fun as it was in the 80s, and I still watch commercials on television, and I still say that's good, that's awful, and most of them are awful, but there we are. I'm a licensed boatman now. Okay, this is the flag of the Rampart Owners Club, which you will see, which the club has got 30 odd member boats, all like this, well, something like this, and this flag was designed by a very great friend of mine called Peter Spurrier, who was a herald at the College of Arms, and he designed it so that, you see, Rampart Owners Club. I acquired the boat in 1999 as a result of having joined the newly formed Rampart Owners Club, which first met on a beautiful Rampart 48 called Highland Beauty in St Catherine's Dock, and I was allowed to join as a member, despite the fact that I didn't actually have a boat, but I did have a 1979 leaflet, a sales leaflet about the 39-foot Rampart, which was exactly the same layout as this one, but 10 feet shorter. So I joined the club, which, as I said, newly formed, and within a very short space of time, Peter Desty, who was one of our honorary members and son, or grandson really, of the founder of Ramparts, but was heavily involved in building all the motorboats, including mine, rang me up and said, there's a Rampart 48 in Lymington Yacht Haven. And I leapt onto my motorbike and drove down from Chiswick to the Yacht Haven, and there she was. And I met the owner's son, and I said, well, I'm going to buy this boat. It's only a question of agreeing the cost. And that was in August 1999, and she was ashore for a while and was relaunched on the 9th of the 9th, 99. We've got the wake of the patrol boat, and here we go into a sea. See, look at this. Wonderful. Okay. I think it's 92. Minesweeper ahead. Good. Hope they're clearing the sea for me. Right, we're going to dip the ensign, and the Navy will have to dip theirs. So Angus, will you please dip it on my signal?
Hi, Captain.
And we will watch them. There should be an announcement on the ship, because I did this before in Portsmouth, and the loudspeaker goes out saying, and off they run down the deck, dip the ensign, and then once they've dipped we can hoist it back up again.
Oh, right.
Yep. Where's theirs? They've got a flag. They've got nothing to dip. Where's your flag? Oh, there. Up on the top.
What is bad manners?
Yeah, not bad. Okay, raise up.
We're flying it!
No. Well, that's naughty. But I don't know what that flag is up the top. I bought a Rampart, and I mean there were other boats I looked at, but in particular because they are the last handmade motorboats that sensible people can afford. And if you look around the boat, you will see ample evidence of all this craftsmanship, which is just perfect. I mean, the way they fasten things, no corners are cut in order to do the job properly. I'm a classic fan. I had an E-Type Jaguar once upon a time, and I love classic cars and classic boats. I looked at the Fairy Swordsman. I decided that was a bit tacky. It was built of plywood and bits, and this is solid. This is inch Eroka planking on the hull, on Canadian rock elm thingamajigs, stringers, and the interior is all mahogany and veneered plywood. I mentioned the dread word. An interesting thing about the name of the model, Rampart 48, is that I don't think any of the Rampart 48s are actually 48 feet long. And this is because ramparts were built up the Itchen River in Southampton, and at the yard there the doors were 12 foot wide. Hence the maximum beam of any rampart is 12 feet. The length of them depended upon the logs that were lying in the mud in the Itchen River, and to cut, the right length and so on. So this boat is actually 51 foot 6 inches long. The latest versions of the Rampart, which finished in 1981, I think the last one was commissioned, some of them are well over 50 feet. I say well over, a couple of feet over. So it's not, it's just called a Rampart 48, presumably, because, there are some that are 47 feet, as well as the 50-foot ones. So there's no rhyme or reason really behind it, except that they are called the Rampart 48. I mentioned that they're built in Southampton, and that's where the yard was. It's now a block of flats, unfortunately, but there is still a Rampart house, a small turret house, which was owned by the Desty family, and the yard was started by Horace Desty, whose father was thrown out of his house in Southampton for building one dinghy too many in his sitting room, and so they moved to the yard. And there was one built for Douglas Fairbanks Jr.'s then girlfriend or wife or something of that sort. There is one Rampart still afloat, which allegedly was used by Ronnie Biggs to escape the country, and when it was being renovated, machine gun bullets were found in the hull planks. This boat, according to Peter Desty, is a joinery version. and it has more doors than a Brighton boarding house. And they all still, after 47 years, shut beautifully. There's nothing sticks anywhere. It also has a companionway from the deck saloon up to the fly bridge, if you want to call it that. Maybe that's what powerboaters call. It is the bridge, and it used to be a boat deck because there was a boat on it. Therefore, this is technically a ship. But it was one of these pram dinghies out of which I fell on numerous occasions because it was so unstable. So it went the way of all pram dinghies. And that is now a seating area up on the top for my charter guests. And to my complete and utter surprise, the first people who hired the boat was a hen party. And so all these luscious young scantily clad women came aboard with more booze than I had ever seen. I thought the boat was going to sink, and it poured with rain, it howled, the wind howled, and off we went to Cowes, and they loved it. And I thought, so this isn't just a boat for old fogies. Of course, the older generation, particularly ex-naval officers who have been on board, say, wow, this is a proper ship. It goes through the waves instead of bouncing from one to the other. Also in Alum Bay, I had an interesting charter party on board who, I knew this in advance, obviously. They were burying the father of the family, who was a naval diver. And obviously we didn't have the body on board, you understand, we had the ashes, all beautifully wrapped up in a staggering piece of carpentry, draped with the Union Jack flag, weighted appropriately, weighted by a cannonball, a real old ex-naval cannonball, in a net. And we sat in Alum Bay having a tearful picnic lunch, and the son gave a little speech and said, I'm now going to tip into the thing, the vase or whatever it was, some 1914 vintage brandy. So that was done, and then they had some vintage port, and that was poured in as well, and then we went into the deepest part of the Hurst Narrows, and the son slid his father quietly over the stern, and the place was marked on the GPS as to where they were, and I thought that was a wonderful way to go. Knowing me, I shall probably end up with my son setting fire to the boat and setting the autopilot and cheerio dad. But no, I don't mean that unkindly. In fact, I don't really mean it at all, if I'm honest. The records are less than clear as to what these boats cost when new, but I have one specific piece of interest, a specific fact, which is that a Rampart 48 used to cost £90,000 back in 1978 to 80, something like that. My boat is probably going to be reinsured at around 50 to 55,000 now. Compare that with another Rampart, which is older than mine, same length, 48 feet, built in 1950s, I think, and it was taking people round Dover Harbour on trips around the bay type of thing. It was bought by a couple who were in the city, and they took the whole of the insides of the boat out. They almost replanked the hull. They completely rebuilt it. Nobody knows quite how much they spent on it, but it is rumoured to be in the region of £600,000. Not 60,000, 600. And you think, well, what's the point of that? Okay, so when you turn the electric hob on, the generator automatically starts, and it is basically a picnic boat, and it's charterable for Henley Week and all that sort of stuff. But as the owner said himself, what other boat as beautiful as that could I buy for £600,000? And of course you'll never get that money back, but if you've got that sort of money to spend on a boat, why not have your own personal hand-built Rampart? The naturist, nudist, round the island swim. Now, you might ask, well, what are you doing getting involved in that? That's another story, okay? But I volunteered to let Malabar transport, be one of the two motherships to all these people swimming naked round the Isle of Wight, which included one notable cross-channel swimmer, Kevin something or other. And everybody arrives. It's a night in August. It's the busiest night in the Solent in August, because there was Cows Week and there was some major ocean race going on, so it wasn't quite the best day to choose, but it was warm and the sea was quite warm. So we go to Ryde Pier, and there's one other support boat, and the swimmers strip off, jump in the Solent and start swimming. Now, very few motorboats of any size can pootle along at 1 or 2 miles an hour, let alone one with 47-year-old diesel engines in it. You have to keep revving them up and making them work hard. And so I also had 2 naked canoeists on the back of my boat who would project themselves in their canoes, I hasten to add, off the back of the boat and support the swimmers. So I had to then leave them and do a big circle away from the swimmers to give the engines a bit of exercise. Anyway, what happened was, and I'm sure you're dying to know whether everybody on Malabar was naked. Well, they weren't. They were fully clothed. It was midnight when the swim started, and it was a little fresh for that sort of thing. So by 4 in the morning, the swimmers had reached the Needles. But so fast was the tide going out that they reached the Needles ahead of schedule, and the tide was still sluicing out, which is fine for the swimmers and didn't make much difference to me. But unfortunately, the other support boat, which was a sailboat, a plastic sailboat, got caught by the current and sucked in between the Needles and came stuck on a falling tide in between the Needles. And this guy raided me up and said, would I come and rescue him? I said, I'm sorry, no way am I endangering my vessel to help yours. So the Yarmouth lifeboat was summoned at great speed, and the people were rescued off the boat, the plastic boat that was still on the rocks. And I thought I'd be very clever on Malabar, show how wonderfully I could manoeuvre the boat. So when the lifeboat came alongside to deliver these shivering naked souls, I kept manoeuvring the boat to bring it alongside the lifeboat, you see. And the skipper of the lifeboat then was a delightful chap called Charles or Hugh or something like that. And he said, excuse me, sir, would you mind staying still and I will manoeuvre to you? And so that was a lesson learned, really. And anyway, unfortunately the race was abandoned, the swim was abandoned, and I had to take all these people who were now not only clothed but wrapped in those sort of foil blankets that athletes get wrapped in, all the way back to Cowes, and there was never a round the island swim. But you see, you can do anything in a Rampart, absolutely anything.
Thank you.